Before I even kick off this analysis, I just want to start off by thanking each and every last one of y'all that helped my last video on the whole Sesshomaru x Rin controversy, a follow-up to my first ever analysis for BGA, and not only making it the first ever of these analyses to reach 10,000 views, but it hit 10K on my birthday. Y'all gave me a gift I will never forget. So from the bottom of my non-binary, nerdy, neurodivergent, and autistic heart, thank y'all so much for your likes, comments, support, encouragement, debates, and friendship over the last 6 months, half a year, and now 8th video. Honestly, it really helps inspire and motivate me to keep putting out your favorite in-depth, informative, educational, and entertaining analyses and reviews. All that said, before I get into today's controversial analysis, I just want to take a moment to issue a trigger, content, and catastrophically kaiju-sized spoiler warning for the entirety of the Fruits Basket manga and subsequently the upcoming season 3 finale. If you peep my first 2-part analysis on this particular series, Fruits Basket, Overcoming Trauma and Breaking Generational Curses, released back in September of 2020, then you pretty much know that once BGA posted this promo announcing the final season, I made my way over to the nearest wall and proceeded to joyfully twerk recklessly upon its smooth surface. Actually, not really. You know my ass is lying. I definitely don't have the knees for that, but I was definitely happy. And really sad. I picked up Fruits Basket back in 2004 when I was 15 years old. For me, almost 20 years ago now. And even when it had been picked up for its first animated adaptation, part of me was always so unsatisfied that I'd never get the chance to see characters like Rin, or that people who had only been able to experience the first animated adaptation wouldn't get the chance to experience the same emotionally impactful character development, or the nuances of the manga that subsequently saw Fruits Basket Season 2's 2020 adaptation take home Crunchyroll Award for Best Drama. And when I found out it had won, I cried so hard you'd have thought I was Natsuki Takaya herself receiving the news. This is one of the series that has shaped me into the person I am today. It's genuinely part of me and has been for so long. Saying such a bittersweet but beautiful goodbye feels like the end of the Fruits Basket banquet, when any of the members of the Zodiac finally say goodbye to their animal spirit when the curse finally breaks. I talk more in depth about what this series means to me in my first video, so you all can check that out on BGA's IGTV or head on over to my YouTube channel. However, in that same video, I also asked if you, the fans and audience, would like me to do individual analytical profiles on each central character, and the response was positively overwhelming. I also mentioned that since my first analysis was largely centered on Toru for the most part, that the first official profile would be on her parents, Kyoko and Katsuya. And if you watched the Sesshomaru x Rin controversy video, then you already know exactly where I'm going with this. It's finally time to dissect one of Shojo's most infamously beloved couples. Let's kick this series off by examining the chain of events that led to Toru's conception, birth, and the subsequent trauma, both generational and accumulated, that would shape Toru into the person she would later become, while also making her one of Shojo's best, well-written, complex characters in years. See, unlike the Sesshomaru x Rin video, Katsuya and Kyoko were actually a couple from my childhood that I invested a great deal of emotional stock in. Their arc is probably one of my favorites, even as controversial as it is. Kyoko's arc feels very real, particularly relatable if you have ever personally experienced the trauma that Kyoko and subsequently Toru herself had to endure. There was literally not a shred of love, empathy, or sense of self that Kyoko's parents instilled within her, due to the fact that her mother was very obsessed with her own self-image and the social standing of their family, while Kyoko's father literally had zero interest in his quote-unquote family. Kyoko's parents are explicitly stated to have never once even held their child, even as an infant. This complete lack of love, affection, support, validation, and other very human essentials would later drive Kyoko into a corner, emotionally, psychologically, and physiologically, as well as the very essence that ultimately makes up the human spirit, which was starved and in turn later forced to crave that which she was so severely denied, leading her to seek out that which she lacked by any means necessary, going so far as to find family and companionship in the dangerous girl gang that Kyoko would later join in middle school. Kyoko would subsequently go on to become one of Kanto's most infamous gang leaders, known as the Crimson Butterfly or the Red Butterfly, apropos of how the red taillights of her motorcycle would resemble the wings of a butterfly cutting through the night. Also, just to clarify, because I've seen a lot of confusion surrounding Kyoko's exact age when she and Katsuya first began associating. As stated in the manga, and I definitely wouldn't be surprised if they aged up Kyoko for this very reason in season 3, Kyoko was in middle school when she turned to her exceptionally violent and deadly life of crime. It was around this time where she was robbing, knifing, beating, and attempting to literally kill people that she would subsequently meet the teacher's aide that would later go on to be her husband and father of their child, Toru. Whereas we in the West are used to our version of the quote quote-unquote standard grade level system that places middle schoolers in the age bracket of 11 years old and 13, Japan's school systems work so that school children are supposed to attend middle school from between the ages of 12 to 15. Kyoko's age at the time of her untimely demise is officially listed as 30. Toru is listed at 16 at the time and a first-year high school student, as high schools in Japan will start students roughly at age 16 and last 3 years as opposed to 4 years like here in America. 30 minus 16 is 14, meaning Kyoko was roughly around 12 or 13 when she began running around with and subsequently becoming the leader of her gang, but definitely 14 when she gave birth to Toru by way of Katsuya, of whom is 8 years older than her, as confirmed in the manga by Natsuki Takaya herself. Even if Kyoko was 13 when she met Katsuya, that would still make him 21 years of age. Yeah, now y'all are starting to see that romanticized pedophilia. And I'm not being entirely flippant either. The reason I used to stand Kyoko and Katsuya so hard and heavy back when I was growing up was because at that point in my life, as a result of being conditioned by society and mainstream media to see older men as quote-unquote better, a total fallacy, portrayed especially within the mediums of romance-heavy genres of anime, manga, and hentai that I consume from the tender and impressionable ages of 9 and up, as well as the resulting trauma of my own parents falling out, in some large due part to my dad being a whopping 10 years younger than my mother and marring my view of younger men in general, thus emphasizing why older men were quote-unquote better. Well, I'll be the first to admit I was conditioned, like many others, to not see a problem with Kyoko and Katsuya's relationship. I saw their age difference as just another hurdle in their otherwise perfectly tragic love story. Like, really, what did their 8-year age gap matter so long as their love was genuinely pure and they loved each other? Well, it matters a whole effing lot. And conversationally is precisely the type of mindset and reaction that the media often encourages from within its audience when portraying men with children in age gap relationships. Through my personal scope, I was more focused on how Kyoko, who I could definitely relate to in terms of toxic and abusive parents and seeking out love and validation from all of the wrong places, completely did a 180 upon meeting Katsuya. And yes, one of my least favorite and overused sexist writing tropes, especially when one part of the romantic couple is a traumatized, vulnerable, and impressionable child, but bear with me, y'all. When Kyoko met Katsuya, it was literally during Kyoko having a complete psychologically and emotionally charged breakdown. Kyoko lashes out by screaming, throwing chairs, and ultimately doing her best to destroy the room she's currently sequestered in. She's so angry, and this next part always gets me because I used to do it myself, to the point of where she is clenching her fists so tight that her nails cut into the palms of her hand with enough force to draw significant blood and stain her fingernails. Katsuya, unlike the other teachers who had no problem raising their hands to Kyoko, a troubled, traumatized student, was, by contrast, that one still quiet entity in the room that finally let her express herself. He then calmly attempted speaking to her in a level manner as opposed to using the verbal abuse she was so accustomed to from the other teachers and adults. Katsuya spoke directly to the part of her that craved everything she had been denied and ultimately provided her with her first real sense of understanding and emotional connection from another human being, something she had been nurtured by her circumstances to be so desperate for. For the first time in her brutal life, Kyoko's hardened facade broke, resulting in Kyoko shedding tears and admitting just how much pain she was truly in and how much she was being suffocated by loneliness. Under the guise of taking Kyoko home because she wasn't feeling well, Katsuya convinces Kyoko to skip the rest of the school day with him and get ramen. At the restaurant, Katsuya teases Kyoko for her lack of eyebrows, referencing the common trend amongst actual Japanese girl gangs where members will often shave their eyebrows or draw them in extremely thin. As he does so, he reaches out to touch Kyoko's face. The intimate contact makes Kyoko blush, and while she justifiably remands him for getting so handsy with her, it's at this moment that Kyoko falls in love with him too. And oh my god, the problematic messages that sends. On the last day of Katsuya's stint as a teacher's aide, they go to the beach where Kyoko openly admits that she's sad she won't be able to see Katsuya anymore, but promises to turn her life around. He agrees to help prepare her for her high school entrance exams by tutoring her on the weekends. Unfortunately, Kyoko's past actions catch up with her when Kyoko decides to quit her gang for good. She's viciously beaten and left for dead. By the time she regains consciousness, Kyoko falls into despair upon realizing she can no longer take her exams in her condition. And to add literal insult to injury, her parents put Kyoko out of the house for good and disown her on the same day as her discharge. Like the stereotypical prince in shining armor, at that precise moment, Katsuya appears at her parents' house, ultimately tells them what shitty parents they are, and announces his intentions to marry their daughter. What does Kyoko's father say? Take her. She's dead to us. Katsuya and Kyoko then confess their feelings for one another, with Katsuya admitting he was sensitive about her age from the beginning, but always intended to be with her in the end. They get married in what follows is probably one of the most heart-wrenching, realistic, and relatable depictions of someone who has experienced deep and violent parental trauma reacting to the news that they are pregnant. This is one of my favorite scenes in the entire manga. Not only is it beautifully well written, but it completely subverts the typical and stereotypical trope we often see in media of being blissfully happy upon finding out that you're pregnant. Kyoko is a complete mess. When she tells Katsuya the news, there's no rushing into one another's arms, blissful smiles, or tears of joy. Tears, yes, but certainly not of joy. Understandably, 14-year-old Kyoko is crumbled physically by the news of this pregnancy and has a full-scale breakdown. She laments over not being able to care for another human being and being terrified to make the same mistakes that her own parents made, when she herself still has so much learned self-hatred and self-destruction to unpack. Kyoko fears hurting her child and passing down that same generational trauma more than anything. This is so realistically and incredibly beautifully portrayed across just a few short pages and panels. Honestly, one of the scenes from the manga that I'm looking forward to seeing depicted in the anime, namely because I cannot praise enough just how well Fruits Basket handled a very personal topic that surrounds my own fears and anxieties of having children, especially speaking as someone who chose years ago to have an abortion and escape what was ultimately a life-threatening and dangerous situation, while completely supporting her in every way that she needs to be. Katsuya calms Kyoko and reminds her that because she has acknowledged these fears and anxieties, that Kyoko already has the potential to be a great mother and caregiver, while also explaining all of the healthy ways in which they'll love and help their child to grow. There's a lot to unbox with that, but the result is ultimately the same, with Kyoko feeling reassured and confident enough in that moment to have their baby. What follows is 3 short years of heartwarming bliss as Katsuya and Kyoko raise Toru with all of the love they have in their souls, and they are truly the picture of a healthy, happy family. Kyoko and Katsuya are even talking about making a sibling for Toru and growing their family, just one of the many reasons why Katsuya's death the following day completely sends Kyoko over the edge, and to me personally is still one of the most tragic deaths I've ever experienced in literature. To make matters worse, Katsuya's family, save for Toru's paternal grandfather, were completely opposed to their marriage and would subsequently verbally abuse, beat down, and even blame Kyoko for Katsuya's death. Saying this all while Kyoko, now 17 going on 18, a newly widowed single mother, is literally grieving over the body of her dead husband and the one person in this world she truly believed understood her. Very much like Kyoko struggles with pregnancy, her reaction to Katsuya's death is so visceral that you physically feel her pain come through the pages themselves. If you have ever lost a loved one who was your anchor to this very world, her pain cuts and resonates through and with you. Kyoko falls into a state of pure catatonic shock, unable to function at the loss of Katsuya, and ultimately becomes a very neglectful parent in that she literally never speaks to nor interacts with Toru during this time, literally forgetting her own child exists, so overwhelmed with grief. And I love this because it shows what grief can do to us and the effects it has on us as a person, as opposed to most manga and anime and media that will depict a traumatic event, but by episode 2 we see they're fine. It gets so bad to the point where the house falls into disrepair, and Kyoko spends days, weeks, months lying on the floor of their decrepit apartment, not even making sure her own daughter is being fed properly. Kyoko's despair finally culminates in a near dangerously successful suicide attempt. This scene breaks my heart because we're reminded in explicit detail that 3-year-old Toru has been present and witnessing her mother's decline this entire time and has been on the receiving end of her neglect, as Toru watches Kyoko stand up, softly announce with a heartbreaking smile that she wants to see Katsuya, and calmly walks out the door without a single glance back at her daughter. And I'm going to say this as someone who attempted to take their life years ago and would have succeeded had the pills I'd taken at the time been enough. I get this. When you are at that edge, you don't care who you are leaving behind. You just want your pain to stop. So this resonates with me in a way that is so deeply personal, I'm trying not to cry as I read the script. And it's just a testimony to how Fruits Basket is just a beautifully written series and conveys emotions like despair in ways that are so hard to capture. Kyoko makes her way to the ocean with the intent to drown herself and is right on the cusp of blissfully falling to her death when she sees a young girl around Toru's age interacting with her mother. Kyoko rushes home in a panic, only to see Toru had fallen asleep by the door waiting for her mother to return. Toru simply wakes up and smiles, smiles, welcoming her mother back home. It's in this moment we truly feel the impact that everything has had on Toru's delicate 3-year-old psyche up until now, as this poor child is forced to wrap her mind around the fact that her mother meant to leave her and never come back, just like her father. We see the long-term emotional and psychological effects this has on Toru. In fact, it shapes her very psychology, which in turn molds the personalities of Toru we see over the course of the series. I touched more upon this in my first Fruits Basket video, so I won't go into too much detail about it here, but ultimately Toru's famously upbeat and cheery personality is a trauma-constructed persona as a result of Toru consciously deciding as a child that she would have to present as agreeable, even to the point of having no personal boundaries, friendly, kind, approachable, and above all, someone lovable who would never again be abandoned by anyone, especially her own mother. Relatably, I also touch upon my own grandmother's suicide in another video that I did for BGA. If I had known what my grandmother had been going through that made her take her life, I probably would have done the exact same thing as Toru and have done the same thing in the past as well. Toru even takes this a step further by intentionally mimicking her father's speech patterns, his polite way of talking, his smile, literally assimilating any part of her father into her own core personality to genuinely keep her mother happy and from leaving again. Kyoko and Katsuya's stories are written in a way that's meant to help both readers as well as the cast of Fruits Basket not only come to terms with whatever trauma they may have endured as a result of adult abuse, but also shedding light on the prospective unacknowledged and unresolved traumas that the adults who had a hand in raising us experienced, never excusing the abuse they perpetuated, but reminding us that they are the way they are for a reason. It's also one of the reasons I'm so excited to cover Akito, one of my favorite complex characters in the future. Fruits Basket, with Kyoko and Katsuya and even Akito's story, isn't trying to magically make you forgive the adults in your life for the trauma you will be working through possibly for the rest of your life. In fact, what I love about Fruits Basket's narrative is that it even validates the idea of not being forced or obligated to forgive your abusers in order to move past your trauma and lead a fulfilling life. Fruits Basket is simply conveying that the trauma we ourselves inherit from the adults and circumstances in our lives and theirs were in turn passed down from their interactions with equally traumatized and abusive adults in their lives. It doesn't at all excuse it, but understanding this will in fact help you to become a better parent in person if you yourself were raised by abusive adults, so that you can recognize the toxic and abusive patterns, the true family curse for many, and break them before they can affect the next generation. If Kyoko and Katsuya's stories do help you process past relatable trauma, then great, all the better. Fruits Basket has done its job. However, we cannot ignore the elephant in the room, that despite their relationship being portrayed as one of real and true love, Kyoko and Katsuya's entire relationship is highly controversial and highly illegal, and yes, can be seen as even predatory. It romanticizes and furthers the trope of the troubled, young, misunderstood girl who can only be saved by the significantly older and quote-unquote mature man in her life who appears when she's at her most vulnerable with no stable sense of self. I have no doubt in my mind that when these episodes air come season 3, fans will in fact be divided over this, and understandably and righteously so. And at that time, I definitely will be following up more with that and touching more upon the whole age gap trope in general. But to finally bring this video to a close, objectively speaking, while the nature of Katsuya and Kyoko's relationship should be highly scrutinized, there's no denying that the heavy themes and topics that can be found within their story arcs are absolutely relatable and were both explored and handled very well. Literarily speaking, it genuinely works as far as the story feeling organic in relation to the overall narrative that makes up Fruits Basket. Now, would I like to see more shoujo and josei manga that show a troubled young girl not needing to be saved by the very adult men in her life in a romantic way, and instead shows him encouraging her in a way that is non-predatory, healthy, and legal? Yes! But alas, that is a topic for a future video. Or is it? I just so happen to be the creator and writer behind North Caesar's historically first LGBTQIA+ romance, drama, and erotic josei manga, Hanakotoba, The Language of Flowers, which not only centers a black queer trans person and a female-to-male trans person as the protagonist, but also centers other, no, not teenage, but grown-ass black and POC queer characters. The preview just dropped on the North Caesar beta app, so check out the link in my Instagram bio at JackJackAttack to give it a read, and stay tuned for more exciting news on my upcoming official brand of non-binary, nerdy, and neurodivergent. Next analysis, Hatsuharu Soma. Thanks again for watching, y'all. Don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to Black Girls Anime LLC for more in-depth, informative, educational, and entertaining reviews and analyses of your favorite anime, manga, video games, and more, all for the culture.